Looks like Obamacare is not out of the woods just yet. The Supreme Court is going to be taking up a new challenge, a legal challenge to the Affordable Care Act called King versus Burwell. Let's talk about the details of it and whether or not there is any legal validity to their argument. The justices agreed to have the final word on a challenge to the legality of federal subsidies in 36 states, which declined to build their own state-run exchanges and handed some or all of the task over to the federal government. The plaintiffs allege that the plain text of the ACA confines the subsidies to an exchange established by the state, but not the federal healthcare.gov exchange, which serves residents of states that didn't build one. So let's be clear, they are literally just taking up this challenge because of that one word, by the state, even though arguably you could say the United States, it is a state as well. They're saying that that this invalidates that portion of it, and it would make, for well over 7 million Americans, it would make their current health care coverage impossible to afford because it would take those subsidies away from them.
I think we're in a lot of trouble.
I think we're in a lot of trouble too, but it's crazy that we're in a lot of trouble because the intent of the law is frickin' obvious.
It's as clear as it could be.
It's as clear as it could be. It is not written terribly well, but its intent is really clear. And if there were a normal Supreme Court, they'd go with the intent and they'd get the legislative intent.
Right, but I mean, there's the irony of it is that the guy who created this trouble in the first place is Chief Justice John Roberts. In the original Obamacare decision, where he largely came out in favor of Obamacare being constitutional, because it most certainly is, he did throw in the caveat about, that different governors could choose not to expand Medicaid, which then created the necessity of the federal government to create a market for those people, which they didn't anticipate. That's why the law is not really poorly written. They just didn't think that the Supreme Court would knock out a significant portion of it, right?
And a lot of people felt at the time, not a lot of people, but a few smart people said at the time, this is laying the groundwork for cutting it apart piece by piece so that the Supreme Court doesn't look like a partisan hack operation, which of course it is, that what John Roberts was smartly doing was saying, no, I think it's legal, but laying the groundwork to take it apart over time. And I think that's exactly what he's doing.
So they didn't start the federal exchange at all until after the Roberts decision?
Yeah. That's my understanding.
I thought it was already.
I thought the part that is at issue in this case is the exchange that is for the states that have not expanded Medicaid because of the Roberts decision.
Federally run state exchanges.
Okay, federal.
Right, but were they federally run state exchanges prior to the Roberts decision?
My impression was that they were, but
I
it's
thought they
possible
were
that I'm
also,
remembering
but
that correctly.
But
we also have to bear in mind another thing that has changed. It's probably not something that's going to overly influence the Supreme Court. Is that since the NFIB versus Sebelius, the case that you were referring to, many more of the components of Obamacare have gone into effect. People have more experience with it, and they generally have a much higher opinion of it. Again, not something that's likely to affect the conservatives on the Supreme Court, but it could lead to some strike back against Republicans if they champion this case being taken up and judgment being delivered that tears it apart.
It's still young enough that they could still strangle it in its crib. And to Richard's point, I think that's exactly what Roberts is doing. Right. I think Roberts came in and said, I declared it constitutional. Aren't I the most reasonable, moderate judge in the history of America? I, said Obamacare was fine. But I took off one of its limbs. And now they didn't have to hear this case at all. And the funny thing is, the conservatives say the D.C. Circuit that was going to rule on it at the lower level, they said, since it has more Democrats than Republican appointees, it's politically biased because it has more Republicans than Democrats.
They were so
positive. But wait a minute, the Supreme Court has more Republicans than Democrats. Yeah. Why isn't that politically biased? No, of course not.
That's the Supreme Court.
Yeah, right. Of course they're politically biased. So you're just skipping ahead to the most politically biased court. And here, they wouldn't have taken the case if they weren't going to rule against it, because 4 justices said, yes, we'd like to overturn what happened at the lower courts. That's why we're hearing the case. So they're going to rip off another limb of it, and then you're going to be in some serious trouble. Yeah.
And also, I'm sure that it's obvious to most people watching this, but let's be clear about what these 2 cases have aimed to do, who they've targeted. Originally, in saying that you can opt out of Medicaid expansion, they're basically saying that the poorest people in these states could theoretically be blocked from having health insurance. That necessitated the expansion of the federally run state exchanges. They're now saying that might be undercut. We're talking about, as I said, millions and millions of Americans who perhaps for the first time in their lives can actually afford health insurance being thrown to the wolves again. Does anybody believe that the non-federally subsidized health insurance plans that would come about from the private health insurance companies after this future decision would be more affordable for any of these people? I mean, millions and millions of people will lose their health insurance coverage, and the only reason the Republicans think that they can get away with this is because they believe that those people do not vote. And the saddest thing of all is that the exit polls from this election show that they're probably right.
So
those people voted at extremely low rates.
That's why I say that maybe they could strangle the baby in the crib of Obamacare in this particular regard. With the Medicaid expansion, those are the most the least powerful people in the country, right? The most disenfranchised and sometimes voluntarily disenfranchised, right? So now, having said that, if it then, missing 2 arms or 2 legs, falls down and then Obamacare is kind of basically defeated, right? Then I think your point is a legitimate one, John, where there might be a rising anger like, Jesus, you took that away too?
I mean, I had health insurance, and I'm going to lose it.
The government had done something for me, and at that point, it will have been about 2.5 years or so by the time that whole process is done, and people will have had it for a couple of years, and then you say to everybody, oh, we were just kidding. The one thing we did for you, we're going to rip it away. Then you might get like a real rising anger.
But remember, that's only going to be true in this case, as I understand it, in which are the ones that are red states? Because I got my colors crossed for a second. It's only going to be true in the red states because the blue states, by and large, have set up their exchanges. So the red states, the ones who got screwed on Medicaid too, are now going to get screwed on access to insurance.
There are 36 of them. That's the problem.
But
There's
it
a lot.
Provides Democratic candidates in some future election in those states with something to run on.
But
if Democrats ever ran on anything.
Politically, this will end up being a great thing. But like at some point, we have to, as you were saying, worry about the actual the people who are affected by the policy. Really quick, what I think is interesting about it is, so 4 judges took up the case, surprising many people because the thought was the Supreme Court was probably going to let the appellate court handle it following the D.C. Circuit Court's full decision. But so 4 judges did it. If you assume that 3 of them are Scalia, Thomas, and Alito, then you speculate as to, we won't really find out, I don't believe. They don't reveal that. But who the 4th judge is, was it Roberts or Kennedy?
That matters.
If it was Kennedy, it's definitely over.
If it was Kennedy, it's definitely over. The irony is that if it was Roberts and this was part of his plan, wouldn't it be great then to lose Kennedy on the second ruling? And Kennedy has shown a willingness to disappoint all kinds of people on a consistent basis. And I say that not in the way that might be interpreted as, oh, because he's noble and good. No, I don't think he has a clue at all what he's doing.
I think he's on his phone a lot.
Right.
He's not paying attention.
Texting during arguments. So if it's Robert...
Counsel, could you repeat that again? I was just tweeting and I lost track of it.
I vote no.
Okay.